All right, again, I want to welcome all of you. And each month I try to bring in a friar or maybe a group of friars just to kind of talk about their lives, what it means to be a Franciscan, what brought them to the order. And you'll find that while entering into these Zooms, you will find not only some fascinating friars, but you'll get a chance to see each other too. Right now, there are about 70 men who are inquiring, like yourselves. And they're just in the process of trying to find out where's God bringing them. They've looked at us, the Franciscans, and so what my job is, or my ministry is, not only to get to know you, but to give you an opportunity to get to know our brothers, and they do some incredible things. So last year, I asked Brother James, to give a presentation, and I was blown away. I'm going to let him explain his background. And I'm going to do that by like kind of a question, like a reporter would ask some questions, and then he'll give the answers and so forth. So, James, we want to welcome you, and I want you to just give us a little bit about yourself. Tell me your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And finally, what brought you to the Friars?
Right. Well, I'm a Californian by birth, Southern Californian, and I grew up just on those of you who know the Los Angeles area, just on the edge of the Santa Monica Mountains, and spent a lot of my childhood climbing through coastal sage and chaparral and building forts and big bushes and that kind of thing. So anyway, I've loved nature all my life. Some of my earliest memories as a child, I realized that the beauty of what God has given us was imprinted on my soul and my mind. And there's a lovely story attached to that, which I may get to. But in any case, my early training was in botany and horticulture. I have degrees from UC Davis, bachelor's and master's degree. Um, I actually had a bit of a career in landscape conservation and had a landscape contractor's license when I was in my mid-20s that allowed me to do some really interesting work back in the 1970s. So you can figure out how old I am. And along about the time when I was, approaching my later 20s, I was very involved. This is post graduate studies. I was very involved with the Catholic student community in Davis, California, which is near Sacramento. And I was hired as a lay campus minister. And back in this was like 1978, I think. It turned out I was the first lay minister that the Diocese of Sacramento had ever hired. And they were kind of in a quandary about what to do with me. But in any case, I worked with a great team. We really had a number of really good years, and I not only received a lot of good training and mentoring by those who were my teammates, but also my elders. And it took a little bit of time for me to figure out that, maybe I have a vocation to this life. And there were at least a couple of friars back in that time that had a significant influence in helping me to see that my life as a biologist and as a landscape professional made a great deal of sense to kind of the core values of the Franciscan life, and especially as described by St. Francis. And just as an aside, I hope each of you has had at least some exposure to Pope Francis's encyclical that came out 8 years ago called Laudato Si. And Laudato Si is takes its initial inspiration from St. Francis's own kind of peak expression of not only joy in creation, but in our relationship with all of creation. We're all creatures. We have been created by God. And this puts us on a certain level of a brotherly and sisterly relationship with all of the created order. And this was really the first push, the first insight by a Western Christian in 800 years ago in terms of describing the human relationship, not the dominance, but the human relationship with nature. So you've probably heard, Brother Sun, Sister Moon, and the Canticle of the Creatures. A number of hymns that we sing today in church are inspired by this very early song that was composed in the Italian language. So, there was a lot for me to grab onto at that time in terms of discovering how I might continue to serve God's people and to be part of a community whose rootedness really is in a love of all of God's creation. So, fast forward a couple years, I began my formation in 1981. I received the habit in 1983. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary with those classmates of mine that are still around. And I think I'll ask Brother Greg to ask his next question.
Well, I also was part of that era. Remember Brother Sun, Sister Moon?
Yes.
And that really, it kind of romanticized version of St. Francis, but Fellini, I think it was Fellini who did the movie, really tied him in with, the beauty of the earth, because there'd be these beautiful sceneries of flowers, like what's behind Brother Jim and James, and you'd see Francis running through it and so forth. And then when he goes through his gradual conversion experience too, he just sees all of nature as, the part of the creation of God, manifestation of God's presence.
That was
Hey, here's something I find.
Franco Zeffirelli.
That's right,
But
Zeffirelli.
there actually was a Fellini movie made on the early lives of the friars in 1951, and it's worth searching out. It's black and white, kind of scratchy, but in a way, it really captured I don't want to use a negative term, but it captured the reality of the early friars, and in a sense, it flows out of the suffering of the people in Europe following World War II. So it's a brilliant film if you ever get a chance to look that one up.
Another thing that strikes me is we look at the indigenous peoples of the United States and how they reverence nature. And we think, oh my gosh, that is so cool. That's the way that they, I heard a story that if a hunter took down an animal, he would actually praise the God, however they address God, and said, thank you for this animal that has provided food and nourishment for our people and so forth. And then I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, Francis was doing the same thing 800 years ago. He was taking all this into context, the fact that this is all God's gift. This is all God's creation for us. When you entered into the Franciscans, and one of the things I always say is that the friars will allow you, within reason, to really use your talents and gifts and go for that. So what made you go further into biology? Did the friars support that, encourage that in you?
even going back to my novitiate year, I remember having conversations with some of our academic friars. I had already a master's degree when I joined,
Wow.
and they just really said, in good time, get some training in theology, and you'll know the right time to really push forward with the integration of my life as a biologist and my life as a Franciscan. So I pursued an MA degree in theology when our theology school was in Berkeley. And I wrote on the kind of the history of the exploitation of the Amazon in light of the contemporary emerging theology that was coming out of Brazil at the time. And it was uh, it was a good challenge. I mean, it was definitely a library piece. I didn't do any field work at that point, but it did kind of lay forth the pathway for further studies and involvement that led me to 5 years of work in the eastern Brazilian Amazon forest as a forest ecologist. So, I've had great opportunities with the friars to being able to travel to different countries to enter into an appreciation of various cultures, learn different languages. Um, uh, like I say, I spent about 5 years in Brazil. This would be back in the late 90s. But in between that time, I also served in direct what we call provincial leadership. I was elected as one of our counselors in our province and served during really a pretty difficult time where we really had to kind of figure out some new and creative ways to be fraternity, number one. So we came up with this idea of what we call fraternity and mission. And okay, so here we are, we're all men. Um, I think we probably each of you can relate to, just the, frankly, the male drive to accomplish. And we found at that time that friars in general were incredibly devoted to their work. And a lot of that work was in parishes and retreat centers and, various other ministries that are more directly identified with church work. And at the same time, the fraternity might have been a little lacking. And so we developed a program that helped to bring friars in their local communities closer together. We basically kind of learned the skill of how to talk to each other. And that was a major turning point for us. And now we call that process in the church, in light of what Pope Francis is leading us toward, we call that synodality. So in terms of what's been happening in Rome in October, the synod that has pulled together bishops along with religious sisters, religious brothers, and lay people to really have in-depth and respectful conversations with each other about the reality of the church and the world today. So that was kind of a key period in my own life. I went off to further studies, came back, and was again elected to our provincial council in the mid we call 2000s. It was 2006, I think, and served in that capacity and became director of one of our old missions in California, Mission San Luis Rey, the king of the missions, as we say. It's the
Yeah.
largest mission church of the 21 in California, and probably had been developed into the most advanced agricultural community during the mission time. So spent a lot of time delving into that history, teaching, bringing nature together with history for people. And lots of invitations at that time to speak in that framework because there weren't too many people that were really talking about that. And in the last 15 years or so, I finally, based on some real inspiration from farm workers in the midst of civil war in Central America, to pursue finally, I guess what I would call a ministry that has brought together all of my training, all of my life as a friar, my international experiences in what we call in biology restoration ecology. And what that means is, in the simplest terms, and believe me, there aren't many friars that understand anything having to do with science, but I tell the friars that my ministry is healing the earth. And so we take these abandoned places that have been degraded, restore them to their natural state, and in many situations, we're actually providing sanctuary for species that we consider endangered. And this has been quite, it's almost a humbling experience. We had this, I don't know, you folks might not be familiar with this film. I'm sure Greg saw it. It came out in the 80s called The Field of Dreams. And it was situation where a farmer had visions of, past baseball players emerging from his cornfield. And the message there was, if you build it, they will come. And remarkably, that's what we've seen on a number of our projects, especially the larger ones, that when natural habitat is restored, the species that are on decline return. They come back and they thrive. And so, the friars have greatly supported me in this work. I work for a small company, a biological company, and it's been the last 14 years of my life doing this kind of work, I would say has been the most important work that I've done as a friar, because it's a summary of so much of my experience and my training, and being able to spend the day with a fairly sizable crew of Latinos. I speak Spanish most of the day, getting their insights on what's going on. And they tell marvelous stories. They obviously don't have the advantage of the education that I've had and probably that many of you have had, but they see nature in a unique kind of way. And this goes back to what Brother Greg was talking about in terms of our Native brothers and sisters. Most of these folks come from indigenous communities in Mexico and Central America, and they get it. I mean, we're the more kind of, I guess, pragmatic folks around maybe kind of scratch their heads like, what are you doing with this? Kind of thing. They get it. They know what we're doing, and they see the results of both rare animals and plants coming back, and we've created these sanctuaries for them.
I saw some of that in my home state of Pennsylvania, where sadly they had done so much strip mining. And so when you would go along the Pennsylvania Turnpike or even creating the tunnels, you would just see these gray mounds there and no vegetation, no life. And Philadelphia had to figure out a way to get rid of its waste. So it set up this thing called Philagrow, where it took human waste and all the other waste that it created and made this incredible fertilizer. And they began to spread it on these slag heaps. And now every time I go through, it's just amazing the greenery that you see. So as Brother James said, that we can reclaim if we really take a concerted effort to do so. another friend coming in, Kevin Fox.
So this is really this kind of work is what we call multidisciplinary work. I could never do it on my own. I mean, I rely on a team. We have a wonderful crew that does a lot of the labor in the field, but also a scientific staff. So we have, from the ground up, we're really able to figure out solutions to problems that are pretty complex. And, you know, um, I've had lots of people tell me, even my advisor in graduate school said, oh, you can never recreate a functional wetland. Well, we've done it and we've seen that it, really functions and all of the complexity, um, purifying water, providing habitat for all kinds of animals, from deer down to insects, and especially the birds. They love it.
So the facet of the company that you work for, um, Tierra Data, I think it's called.
Yes.
Okay. Now that network with other companies because I've read on your bio too that you've been involved with the E.G. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. Can you
Right.
explain a little bit about that? Because I love his quote. I want to quote it. It says, um, and this is the man that founded it, E.O. Wilson. He said, I express the belief that science and religion joined in an alliance can save creation, that is, life in the natural world. And on behalf of science, I will be so bold to offer the hand of friendship. Because many times people saw science and religion at odds with each other, but in this situation, it seems like they've joined hands and are working together. Can you give a little insight into that?
Sure. So E.O. Wilson was, he's passed now, but he was a famous biologist at Harvard. Grew up in the South. He studied insects, but was also a really amazing writer. He wrote a number of books that were accessible for anybody to read on the value of biodiversity and what we would lose if a lot of this biodiversity went away. And so there's a foundation in, I believe it's in Raleigh, North Carolina. And one of the friars from our legacy province of the Holy Name in New York was working in Raleigh as a pastor of a large parish that just happened to be down the street from this foundation that was built on the inspiration of Dr. Wilson's insights. And they got to talking about how how we can actually bring people together to discuss this quote that Brother Greg just read to you. What is the intersection of faith and nature, and how can that be put together in a way that would really promote the healing of nature and the conservation of nature for all people? And so they turned to me to bring to light Pope Francis's encyclical that I mentioned earlier tonight, Laudato Si, which is it comes from the Italian, all praise to you, Lord, all praise to you, my Lord, and which is how Francis, our Father Francis, founder of our order, composed this hymn, which he instructed his brothers, his followers, to go around in that part of Europe and to sing the song for people as an invitation to become more conscientious of an environment that Francis recognized. This is St. Francis 800 years ago, that he already recognized was being destroyed by overexploitation. So our beloved Pope Francis today has brought that to our attention once again, at this incredible inflection point of environment. And I'm often brought in panels of speakers. I just spoke to our diocesan deacons in formation last week, as kind of the science guy with Laudato Si. And there's a lot of science in Laudato Si, and all of it is pretty much what we call established science. It's not really being debated much anymore, because it's pretty clear that the direction that we're going in it could be really, it could just be a disaster. And Pope Francis holds out hope for people like you and me to make a difference today. And chapter 6 of that encyclical, which is kind of the practical, how do you do this thing? It begins with the words, we must change. Pope Francis is calling us to conversion, to an experience similar to the conversion experience that St. Francis had 800 years ago. And if you're interested in pursuing this, first of all, I would suggest that you can go online and read the encyclical Laudato Si, and you can also become a member of the Laudato Si action platform that is actually operated out of one of the departments at the Vatican. So this is a kind of a signature ongoing program of Pope Francis's, and you can check that out at the Laudato Si action platform if you're interested. They send out great material and prayers and progress and what people are doing all throughout the world, to bring to life Pope Francis's challenge that all people, he addresses this to everybody on earth, it's not just to Catholics, that all people are invited into this conversion. We can call it an ecological conversion or a faith conversion, where we enter into a deeper relationship with our brother and sister creatures and all aspects of our environment, that St. Francis kind of laid the groundwork for 800 years ago. And these are things that you can do right now. And Pope Francis issued a kind of a supplement to Laudato Si this year on October 4th, the Feast of St. Francis, called Laudate Deum. Okay, let's praise God. And in it, he really exhorts us basically to get our asses in gear with this. And it's only an 8-page document. You can read it in half an hour or so. But he's really pleading with all peoples to take action now before this inflection point that we're at tips in a bad direction.
I wanted to, I have to admit, a number of years ago, I was kind of skeptical when I started hearing about, the earth warming and so forth. I thought, well, maybe it's just a thing, or maybe it's cyclical or whatever. But when I began to study it, I really saw some fundamental changes that were happening in the earth. For example, I lived in Mississippi for 16 years, and if they would have a tornado, it was like once every 3 years in an isolated spot. Well, now what's happening is every April, people are fearing for their lives because they know that it's going to hit. And I've seen the incredible damage it's done. When Katrina hit, it devastated Mississippi. New Orleans had the flooding, but along the coast of Mississippi is where it took impact. And there was so much built up on the coast that naturally, that energy wasn't being absorbed. It was destroying whatever was in its path. And then when you looked at the marshlands, it looked like nothing happened. So, what we're doing by changing the environment and so forth, and sometimes being just very careless about it, it's having an impact. And I fear too here in Wisconsin. I remember when I used to go into Wisconsin, it was the blackest dirt I've ever seen. All this beautiful farmland. Well, now guess what? It's all being overtaken by Amazon warehouses and these other industries. And now people are starting to complain about flooding and so forth like that. So we do have an impact. So James, before I open it up to questions, what are some practical things that we can do in our own homes or apartments to maybe do our part, as small as it might be?
Well, I would really like to emphasize, the contemporary importance of Laudato Si, and the action platform can get you directly involved with Catholics on a global scale. I mean, even if all you can do is read their messages and offer the prayers that are posted, that's a start. And the point is that as you move more closely into hearing, as Pope Francis says, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, you will be called into a deeper level of personal conversion. Whether that leads you to the friars or to some other kind of ministry or work, this can offer you a real platform for your own future.
Thank you, Brother James. Really appreciate that. I want to open it up to questions now. Any question that you might want to ask?
What current projects are you currently working on with your ministry?
Well, here in San Diego County, where I live, we have 10 active projects ranging from, well, it's hundreds of acres right now. We're working on a couple really important projects down near the border in an area called Otay Mesa. We see the border wall from these sites, so it's that close to Mexico. And these are restoring two different types of endangered environments that both host a number of endangered species. So one of these types of habitat is a functional wetland that we're taking a degraded wetland that was kind of fenced in by some farming activity in the past and expanding it out into much broader wetland habitat environment. So wetlands serve a number of purposes, one of which is they have a much greater capacity to store carbon in the soil. This by the biological activity of these plants growing and what they're doing underground. Really, the root system is really the important thing here. And of course, you're all aware that our carbon dioxide level has been, in a constant upward trajectory since the 1850s, with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the burning of fossil fuels. So wetlands are incredibly important in that regard, and they're also our natural water purification systems. So functional wetland could take some pretty nasty water coming into it. And, even on the acreage that we have about 30 acres here, what we're creating in terms of wetland. Water coming out is remarkably cleaner. It may not be completely clean, but just the biological activity that's going on underground with these wetland plant species does a remarkable job at cleansing the environment. And above ground, they provide habitat for all kinds of critters that would not find a home anywhere else. And I love the stories that my Latino brothers and sisters on the crew tell about the different species that they see arriving for the first time to some of these areas where we're restoring nature. And they, it's their way of perceiving, but it's lovely to hear their stories. The other habitat is a much more kind of specialized habitat for San Diego County. We have these things that are called vernal pools, which form in the spring. We have maybe 3 or 4 months of rain here in California, beginning hopefully this week. We're supposed to get some rain, and that goes until about March or April. And then the rest of the year is pretty much bone dry. So in these areas where these springtime pools, the Latinos call them charcas, which means puddle. This is habitat for, I think I've counted now about 15 different endangered plant and animal species. And the reason is that, here in San Diego, there were 2 fairly large areas that had lots and lots of vernal pools in the past, but they've been impinged on by, development. And so there's 2 areas now where there's a lot of preservation activity going on. And one of them is this Otay Mesa area, which is right down on the border. And we've done a number of these vernal pool projects now going on probably 12 years. So we're considered now among the local crew and team members that have some real knowledge about how to put these things back together. So, like I say, going back to that old film from the 80s, if you build it, they will come. And all we can do is kind of urge things along with the right introduction of seeds and other things to inoculate these vernal pools. And then they become a permanent habitat for species that are just on the tipping point of going away forever. If you end up coming out, the Friars do have a summer philosophy program at Mission San Luis Rey for the guys in formation, usually the first and second year after novitiate. And if any of you get to that stage in your own journeys, I always take folks in this program out to see the work that we're doing. And yeah, they're, I think they come away with the sense that there's something really good happening here.
Amen. Anybody else have any questions for Brother James or insights? Jonathan? You'll have to unmute yourself. Oh, we can't hear you.
There you go.
Oh, you're still mute. Why don't you type it in the chat box? There's a little chat box there, and just type question, and then I'll read it out. Okay, let's see if it comes along here. Were you able to type it? Okay. I was wondering how we can focus more on our ecological impact in the workplace. And what do each of you think about each of our current EVs? these electrical vehicles? Good question. So what about in the workspace?
Well, you've all seen me drinking out of a water bottle here through the conversation. Part of my work over the last couple of years has been with the San Diego Diocese Creation Care Ministry. And one of the things we've really been pushing pretty hard on is plastic water bottles. Okay, and this is something that I know we had a chapter of unity for all the different provinces that have come together now into the Our Lady of Guadalupe province in October. And there was great facility put out. We all got a water bottle, a metal water bottle to fill at a water station. And plastics are a real problem. And to any extent that you could, there it is, there's our chapter water bottle. To any extent that you can, cut down or eliminate the use, especially of one-use plastics like water bottles or grocery bags or any of that kind of stuff. This is what we call low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to do this. And so we've had pretty good success with it. Our entire diocesan office now is plastic free. And I think you can really, there's Simaban is drinking from his water bottle there too. So that's great. Any basic action like that you could take in your own workplace would be great. The simple things that have been available to us now for some time would be obviously converting to low energy lighting, LED lights. They've become pretty much mainstream now. You question about EVs. Well, personally, I've held off on buying an EV. I'd love to get one, but I'm waiting a couple more years until the infrastructure's there to really, support them. And as that technology moves forward, I think by 2025, we can expect the cost of EVs to come down considerably and their efficiency to go up considerably. So it's an emerging field. Yes, it's market driven. It's what people want. And people in technology and manufacturing are, I think, making great strides toward moving to essentially a fossil fuel free transportation that I hope you guys are able to see in your future. I may be gone by then, but I think over the next 20, 25 years, we're going to see a real conversion of fossil fuel derived energy moving more and more toward renewable sources of energy that can be stored in highly efficient battery systems. And this, of course, will go a long way. Our two biggest pollutants, sources of climate changing pollutants today in our country, in the US, are cars and industry. So as we move to really tackle those things on a societal level, we do have a chance to, kind of halt this critical change in climate that we're in the midst of. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum from, what you can do in your everyday life in terms of plastics and whatnot. I would also encourage you, I did graduate work in Pennsylvania, so I have some roots there myself. We did a project back there in the probably 25 years ago on studying sustainable agriculture. And in many places, this is manifested by local producers that sell at farmers markets. And there's a little bit of a trick there these days because not all markets are very well regulated. And, if you do farmer market purchasing of, your produce or, whatever else they have for sale, make sure you're buying it from the grower and not from someone who's just going downtown to the produce wholesale market and putting stuff out. But we're keenly aware here in San Diego, we have actually a rather large agricultural base here. It's in the billions of dollars each year. And, we're a major producer of avocados. So I think some of you appreciate those produce, that type of produce. But more and more, the local scene here is family farms, family production systems that are not necessarily tied into big scale agribusiness operations. So the degree that you can support that would be great in terms of really encouraging local food security and food sustainability.
That's why I love to go to. I love going to Lancaster County with the Amish,
right?
Because all of that food is done without chemicals. They know how to replant and so forth. And so, Kevin, you were asking about where in Pennsylvania. Lancaster County would probably be a great place where the farming is sustainable. And instead of plowing, they're learning now, instead of plowing up the ground, which loses a lot of moisture and so forth, they actually plant in between the harvested crops, and it seems to be pretty successful. So Bobby asked, is there another way to spend like 3 days at San Luis Rey? Are there any programs going right now on environmental integrity or education?
Well, that's a good question for our retreat ministry there. And one of the staff members is a graduate of our theology school, the Franciscan School of Theology in San Diego. Her name is Mercedes. She's very interested in the environment. She's come out herself to see some of our work. So you could contact the Mission San Luis Rey Retreat Center, maybe address your comments to Mercedes and ask her what's coming up.
Well, I want to thank you, Brother James, for your insights. I'm always fascinated by your work. It's just it's neat. And I remember in the 70s, we became very, very aware of what was happening to our world. Rachel Carson wrote a book, Silent Spring, and really told about what was going on with pesticides and how American songbirds were being devastated. And of course, Earth Day came about. So there's been some incremental steps, but I think right now it's our backs are kind of up against the wall. When it only snows 6 inches here in Gary, Indiana, which is a snow belt where you should have up to 80 inches a year, something's going on. So again, I want to thank you and thank all of you for joining us tonight. The next event we're going to host is going to be on December 13th. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a presentation on how Franciscans look at Advent and Christmas. So Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to gather to learn a little bit more about our Franciscan roots and Francis and his appreciation for Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Sister Earth, and that all was created by you, and that we are called to be stewards of creation, to take care of what gifts you have given us. So as we take this presentation, may we also, again, appreciate all the gifts that you have given us and to be those good stewards that we're called to be. And we pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen.